It's week 1 of the NFL season, right? And ladies, you were hoping that you'd be on the couch today to just have a whole day where you could watch games from sunup to sundown. And 21 minutes ago, the 49ers just kicked off, right? I mean, they just started their game. But your husband came to you and said, not today. I want to make an investment in our relationship. So record that game, and we're going to this marriage series because I want to have a deep, significant conversation this week about our relationship. So men, way to go. Glad you brought your wives to church. Welcome. And all of you online, thank you for all the men who were at home and you changed the channel to our YouTube station instead of the game. So, why are we doing a marriage series? Because of this. Before COVID, almost 18 months ago, 20 months ago, before all of this, I would ask them, so how's your marriage? And they would say things like this, you know what, our marriage is pretty good. We just don't have much time together. And time became the reason, also known as the excuse, why we didn't have a better marriage. It was pretty good, but we just didn't have a lot of time together. And then along came COVID. And quarantine. Also known as shelter in place. Also known as stuck in place. And the time excuse, the time reason that you had for your relationship not being better was pretty much erased for a lot of us. I mean, the commute to work possibly was no more. She was right in the next room, he was right in the next room, and that whole, hey, we don't have enough time together, that was gone. You get the point? So that if the real reason why our marriages were awesome and thriving and fantastic, when it really was time, then over this whole COVID season, our marriages went from pretty good to great, right? Yeah, I don't hear anyone cheering. So now that I ask the question of people, so hey, how's your marriage? Your story's changed. You say, well, you know what, our marriage, it's pretty good, but it'll be a lot better when my spouse goes back to work. It wasn't time.
And so I just want to ask this question. What if the problem in our marriage, what if the hardship in our marriage, what if the obstacle in our marriage isn't more time or less time, but what we're doing with our time? What if our problem isn't not enough time, but really enough know-how and to go from a good marriage to building a fantastic marriage? And by the way, if you're not married, I would say this. If you want to be married someday, then this is the time to start making sense of all this, because you don't formulate a plan after you're married. You formulate a plan and then date according to the plan and work out that plan in your marriage. And I would say this, if you're not even ever planning on getting married, can I just say this? So many of the principles that I'm about to teach through for these next 6 weeks, you can directly correlate to your friendships, to your relationships at work. If you want to be a better friend to people, you can apply an awful lot of these. So, by the way, let me just say this, quick sidebar. The COVID season hasn't been rough on everybody's marriage. I know there's about 5 couples in our church that are expecting kids in the next couple months here. Y'all figured out what to do with that extra time. So during this series, here's what we're going to ask. We're going to ask these questions. What if the problem isn't time? That's where we're going to go today. What if our problem isn't confusion about how to build a marriage? What if our problem isn't compatibility? What if our problem isn't that we argue? What if our problem isn't that we don't talk enough? What if our problem isn't that we don't read enough psychology books on marriage? Like, what if those aren't our problems? Then what are our problems? We're going to address each of these every week. So this is where our series is headed, and here's my hope. Whatever difficulty that you're facing, whatever barrier is standing the way of you having a great, thriving relationship, I hope God puts his finger on that. So here's where we're going to go, week 1. Ready? If you have notes, please open those up. There's a bunch of fill-ins. You're going to want to take those home this week so you can have that great conversation. What if our problem isn't time? Then what is our problem? I'm going to tell you the premise right off the top. Here it is. It's mindfulness. Mindfulness. So what's mindfulness? Well, let me tell you, Captain Obvious. That's kind of the point. It's being aware of what's right in front of you. Mindfulness is seeing something that is in front of you that is apparent, that you should be able to see. Have you been at the beach? and you watch that person taking a selfie and they were totally unaware of the wave that was crashing behind them, and boom, it knocks them down. Those make for awesome videos. They make for lousy marriages, though. When behind you, you don't see this relationship crashing down on you and you get crushed by it. But if we're aware of what is going on in our marriage and aware of our spouse, aware of our relationship, and being aware of what's going on in us, if we have that kind of mindfulness, it will not crash down around you. So here's our 3 points today. I'm going to give this to you right off the bat. We need to be mindful of a plan, mindful of my spouse, and mindful of myself. Let's start with this, mindful of a plan. Here's my question. Do you have a plan on how to build your marriage before you got married? I mean, before you got married, did you have a plan? Or was your plan, you know what, we're going to take it day by day? Or was your plan this? I just love her, and she loves me, or at least she's putting up with me. So don't we just need love? Then you got married and you realized it takes a little bit more than just love, because it's not actually a plan. People, it's interesting, they have a plan to get married. We call them wedding plans, right? And sometimes we hire people to help us with it, called wedding planners. We spend 700 hours over a process of months or years to plan a wedding. On average, people spend about $30,000 for a one-day event to plan on how to get married. Question, how much time, how much money did you invest before you ever got married on a plan to have a thriving relationship? My opinion is this, I don't think hardly any of us spend $1 or many hours, weeks, or months planning on how to have a great marriage. So here's what I want to do. I've stolen all kinds of great information from not only the Bible, but some books, and I've listed probably 4 of those books in your resources. You're welcome to browse through those. I actually stole this model of marriage. So here's what we're going to do. Tonight, I want you to break out a candle and dim the lights. And then maybe have some chocolate cake or ice cream, 1 plate, 1 fork. Feed each other. I mean, create that atmosphere so that in that moment you can sit down and one of you can say, hey, let's talk about Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Because that's what we're going to look at. Take a look at this diagram right here. This triangle, this psychologist actually created this in the 1980s. And if anyone in the room is my age, you know this, that all good things come from the 80s. Really? You're either all older or younger than me. Sternberg, he's trying to answer this question, what is love? What is love? So he comes up with these 3 points. So take a look at this. At the bottom left, you see passion. And passion is this, it's chemistry. It's romance. It's that spark that you saw her, she saw you, and there was something there. And maybe that didn't happen right away. Maybe actually your relationship started up top there with intimacy. Now, some of you are going to make the mistake that passion and intimacy, they're the same thing. They're not. Intimacy, as he defines it, is this. You intimately know that person. You know about them. They know about you. And you're comfortable with each other. You can be yourself around them. You could substitute in that place, you could substitute the idea of friendship. The third part is commitment. Commitment. Now, we're going to try and make sense of this. So if you see that diagram in your notes, take a look. Because some of you, here's what I want to explain. Some of you, you don't have a healthy portion of all 3 of those points. What happens if your relationship is just about passion? Oh, you know what? We are passionate for each other. I'm not going to go down this road too far, okay? So just... If it's passion alone, this is in your notes, passion alone equals infatuation. And it's hot, and it's quickly over. Relationships like that are not healthy, and they do not last. What happens if it's intimacy? Remember, passion and intimacy, they're different, right? What happens if it's just our relationship? Man, we just really know each other, we get each other, we can be around each other, and we accept each other. Intimacy alone equals friendship. Sternberg often uses the word liking. We just like each other. We just like each other. It's a good friendship. which is great, but that doesn't make a thriving marriage. The third one is this, it's commitment. Commitment is the decision that you're committed to your relationship and they're committed to you. But if you have just commitment alone, here's what you get. Ready? Empty love. I've met too many couples who are like, no, we're committed to our marriage. But they're not really sure what's going on in each other's worlds and each other's hearts, so they don't have that intimacy. And that spark left a long time ago, but they're committed. And so they have empty love because there's just not a lot there besides the commitment. So here's why I show you Sternberg's model. I want you to know this so that you can build a plan. I want you to use this model this week to have a conversation that says, how's our relationship doing? How are we in this category, in that category, in this category? Is there an area that could be better? And we have to feel free to say, hey, this is how we're doing. But it's not just each of those points. Listen to this. Go back to that triangle real quick. You'll notice this. Let's just say passion and intimacy. Let's say those two are strong and the commitment's low, right? You'll see the bar that connects those is called romantic love. And intimacy and commitment, if you have those, it's called companion love. So go back to your notes and let me give you the fill-ins on this. If you have passion, the spark, and you have the intimacy, you know each other well and you accept each other, here's what you have. You have romantic love. It's interesting because I'm going to put my finger on something here, and I hope you're not offended by this, but hang with me on it. For couples who say, you know what, there's a spark between us and we really know each other, but there's no long-term commitment, in our society today, this is what happens. People decide they're going to live together before they're married. And if that's your situation, just hang on. I'm not going to beat on you for that or anything. Just hear me out on this. My concern is this, is there have been studies that are done that over 50% of people agree this. Young people, old people, they agree that living together is actually healthy. Because what they want to do is they want to take that relationship for a test drive and let's see if that's going to work. The National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia found that nearly half of 20-somethings agreed with this statement. Quote, you would only marry someone if he or she agreed to live together with you first so that you could find out whether you really get along. Isn't that interesting? Another stat, about 2/3 say that they believe in moving in together before marriage was a good way to avoid divorce. So just question, is that true? And I'm not asking like, well, is that true according to the Bible? I'm just saying, look at the statistics of it. Is it true that living together, because that really is the romance of it and the intimacy of it without the commitment? Let me quote to you Dr. Les Parrott from his book, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. He quotes this, and he's referencing an awful lot of statistics. He says this, couples who cohabit before marriage, and especially before the engagement, tend to be less satisfied with their marriages and more likely to divorce than couples who do not. These negative outcomes are called the cohabitation effect. And he goes into all kinds of statistics. And let me explain why. There's a psychologist by the name of Meg Jay. She's the author of The Defining Decade, and she tries to explain the detrimental side of the cohabitation effect is due to this. Men and women see living together differently. This is fascinating. I've never thought about this before. She writes this, women tend to see cohabitating as a step towards marriage, while most men see it as a way to stall marriage. This is intuitive, isn't it? You laughed at it because the reality is that she's thinking, we're going to move in together. We're so close to getting married. It's right around the corner. And he's thinking, we just moved in together. Now we can put off that conversation about getting married. What statistics are showing today is what God has told us in His Word a long time ago. Let me read to you something here just real quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16. Now, I'm going to read this from the paraphrase. You'll see it on the screen. The Message is a Bible translation, but it's a paraphrase of the Bible. And it says this, we must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment. Listen to that. That avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever. The kind of sex that can never become one, which is the purpose of marriage, is becoming one. These bodies that were made for God-given and God-modeled love, for becoming one with one another. So passion plus intimacy without commitment is romantic love. So let me put another two of these together. You ready? In your notes, passion plus commitment. Passion plus commitment equals, here's what they call it, foolish love. Now, I'm not calling you a fool, so hang on. But if you have that spark and you're like, we're totally committed and we have this spark, but we don't have intimacy, which is that knowledge of each other where we can truly be ourselves around each other, you have a love that is, it's uninformed, so he calls it a foolish love. You can't be yourself around them. This happens sometimes when couples discover this passion, and then they jump right into a commitment together. And they have this love that's just uninformed and immature that needs to grow in the area of intimacy, understanding who you are and who they are and what makes this work. Third coupling here is intimacy plus commitment. You know each other, you like each other, you're friends. And you say things like, I married my best friend, because there's commitment there. But it's interesting because that spark, that passion, it either left or maybe was never really there. You end up with what's called just companion love. I know in Sternberg's model, he uses the word companionate, just companion love. And sometimes people find themselves there. Now, let me say this. If you had that spark and somehow it went away, can I just say you're not alone? It takes nurture of that. But we'll get into that in the weeks to come. The goal is this. Are you ready? This is no shocker here. It's to strengthen all three of those points. Let's strengthen passion. Let's strengthen our commitment. Let's strengthen our intimacy and our knowledge of each other so that we can have this complete love. Sternberg calls it consummate love. I just thought it was a weird word, so I chose complete love, all right? Changing it just a little bit. I know some of you are asking, like, hey, we're not reading too many verses yet. Is Sternberg's model of love biblical? Let me just touch on this for a moment. And by the way, in a week where we launch this series, I'm probably not going to be in the scriptures as much as I normally am. We will get there, so hang with me on this. Is his theory of love actually biblical? Here's what I know, 3 things. God created each person unique. We know this. He created us unique, but he also created us to not be alone, to be known so that we have a sense of belonging with one another. God also created sex to be enjoyed and as the source of bonding together. And then God created marriage as the commitment to protect the vulnerability of passion and intimacy. I want you to hear that last statement again. God created marriage as the commitment to protect the vulnerability that's required to have passion and intimacy. If those 3 things are true, then I think it's a pretty decent model to start evaluating, hey, how are we doing? And so let's do that this week. So here's my question or my invitation to you this week. Would you have a conversation and just say, hey, how's our marriage doing based off of this model? Why? Because we want to be mindful of a plan. Number 1. Number 2 is this. I want you to be mindful of my spouse, okay? You be mindful of your spouse. Pay attention to them. Question, how's your spouse feeling or thinking about your relationship now? This week, this month? What are they feeling inside about how you're doing? Be mindful of how they are feeling. Be mindful of what they're thinking. Be mindful of how they see your relationship. Be mindful of the great qualities that they bring to the relationship. And also be mindful of how they want to be appreciated. One sure way is this. Ask them, what are you thinking? What's going on inside you? What do you think about our relationship? Here's what I find really, really interesting. Listen to this. 40 times in the Gospels, the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. 40 times it says this, Jesus saw. He saw something that was right in front of him that nobody else saw because he was mindful of the situation and he was mindful of people. Let me just give you a few of those. When Jesus walked by a lake and he sees 2 fishermen, Jesus saw Andrew and Simon, and what he saw were the next 2 leaders of the church, not just 2 fishermen. When there was a paralyzed man who was carried to Jesus by 4 of his friends, it says, Jesus saw their faith, and Jesus saw an opportunity to save this man. When Jesus' disciples, when they walk by this tax collector's booth and there's a guy who's manning the booth that everybody knows is robbing people, Jesus saw, not a criminal, that's who his disciples saw, but Jesus saw a man who would become one of his followers and would write the book of Matthew. When crowds came near to hear him teaching, Jesus saw them with compassion and was mindful of how spiritually confused and lost they were. There's a story where these children mobbed Jesus, they were all around, and the disciples saw a nuisance, but Jesus saw an opportunity to have fun with kids and to bless them. When Jesus entered one particular town, there was a woman who had a horrible reputation, and everybody else saw a disaster. But Jesus saw her as a woman worthy of being loved and appreciated. There's one town that Jesus walks into and the crowds are all around him, and he looks up and there's a guy in a tree. He's a short little guy. He couldn't see, so he climbs up a tree. Everybody else saw the criminal who he was, the dishonest man who he was. And Jesus saw someone who needed a guest for dinner. And Jesus shows up at Zacchaeus' house, and it changes Zacchaeus' life forever. Jesus saw things that were right in front of him that nobody else saw. Can I just state this? I don't see what's in front of me all the time. I don't see what my wife is going through, what she's dealing with all the time. I don't always acknowledge it. I don't see the obvious. But you know what? If you don't always see the obvious too, that's actually a common feature for all of us. There's a better way to explain this. Let's take a look at this video right here.
Today we're going to play a game specifically designed to test your spatial awareness. Meet the Brain Games Double Dutch team. What does jumping rope have to do with the brain? Well, Double Dutch requires off-the-chart spatial awareness. And today, these kids are going to help us test yours. For this game, all you have to do is keep track of the number of times that either of the girls in green jumps. You'll count each time one of them lands a jump, like this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As you can see, these jumpers are pretty quick on their feet, so you're going to have to pay attention to keep up. When the whistle blows, start counting. Ready? Go. So, how many jumps did the green team make? Did you say 38? If so, you agreed with 40% of our test audience. Now, some of you may be onto us, but for those of you who aren't, did you happen to notice anything else going on during the Double Dutch? Maybe a giant chicken strolling right through the middle of the set and doing a funky chicken dance? Now, some of you may have missed that funky chicken, but many of you probably saw it, and that's okay. Because the chicken was just there to distract you too. Here's the real question. What color was the wall behind the Double Dutch game? Here's a hint. It wasn't the same color at the end as it was when they started jumping. The back wall was changing color the entire time, from bright blue to bright red. Nearly everyone misses it. But why? It turns out there's far too much information coming in through the eyes at any given moment for the brain to fully process all of it. As a result, the brain has to act like a spotlight, focusing our attention on some parts of the scene but not others. Now, most of you were probably paying attention to the jumpers, and some of you may have suspected that something strange was going to happen, and so you saw the chicken. But you probably weren't paying attention to the back wall. And what we don't pay attention to, we don't see. And hey, for those of you who managed to catch everything so far, did you notice that we also swapped the rope turners out halfway through? Gotcha.
How many of y'all did not see the chicken? Raise your hand. See, about half people missed that whole thing. There's something that goes on right in front of us, and we just don't see it. So this week, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be mindful. that there's a plan there. And we're going to talk about our relationship based off of that plan. Second thing, we're going to be mindful of our spouse. What's going on in them, with them? How are they seeing things? Let's be mindful of appreciating them. But here's the third thing, and we'll kind of wrap up with this, is we want to be mindful of ourselves. So write that down. I'll be mindful of myself. In specific, what's the thing that's going to get away and in the way of paying attention to the plan and paying attention to my spouse? It's this. It's my agenda. My agenda keeps me busy. My agenda keeps me distracted, and my agenda keeps me self-focused. Now listen, your agenda is probably filled with really good things. Yesterday, mine was filled with cleaning the garage, and it was a really good thing. But there were some other things happening in my relationship with my wife that I had to set that aside, the really good thing, for the better thing. So maybe you might try to get home a little earlier from work, or put your phone in timeout this week. Make a decision so that you will not be distracted by the thing that's actually right in front of you. Let me also encourage you this. If you're mindful of yourself, let me ask you this question. What's the story that's going on in your head about you? I am messing up my relationship. I am doing a great job. I'm unworthy of love. I am hopeless. I am stuck. Are the words that you're thinking, the story you're telling yourself, building you up, affirming you, or are they making you weaker? What's the story you're telling yourself about your spouse? What's the story you're telling yourself about your relationship? Let's get mindful of the story we're telling ourselves. Let me end with this. I have a fresh $1 bill here. Raise your hand if you want a $1 bill. 4 of you. That won't work. I have a $20 bill here. Raise your hand if you want a $20 bill. Less than half of you. Ooh. I have a brand new, fresh off the stimulus plan printing press, $100 bill. How many of you would like a $100 bill? I'm giving this away. Raise your hand. More of you and a couple snobs. Okay. Instead of this guy, I also have this. It's a $100 bill, but the corners are torn. It's not in very good shape. It had some coffee spilled on it. It went through the wash. It was new at one point, but it's kind of had a rough experience in life. How many of you would like this $100 bill? Wow, the same amount of people. So I guess I got to give this away. Does anybody have an anniversary? Is there anybody who raised their hand first, and you're willing to say, I did raise my hand, but you have an anniversary this month? Raise your hand. And you want this $100 bill. No one anniversary this month? 1, 2, 3. 3 of you. Who's got the closest anniversary to today, September 12th? 20? 25? What was that? Easiest $100 you ever made, huh? You want to know what's funny about that? If you raised your hand to say, I'd love the crisp, new, fresh $100 bill, the reason you raised your hand to say, I'd love the broken one, the one that's been messed up, the one that's not looking as good, is because they both have the same value, right? Listen, there's some of you who are engaged. You're planning to enter marriage, and it's like this clean, fresh marriage that you're just dreaming about. And there's others of you, you've been married for decades, and it's a little worn. You've had a little bit of life spilled on your marriage. It's been through the wringer or the wash, and it's not as fresh as it used to be. And I know you barely came to this series, and you're wondering, man, I hope I get something out of this because, man, marriage does not feel like that fresh, crisp, wonderful thing. Your marriage has as much value as anybody else's. If it's been crinkled, cut, torn, soiled, listen, there's value there. And so I hope in these next 6 weeks you will see the value that God has put right in front of you. You'll be mindful of it, that person that you married is valuable no matter how much life has been thrown at them. And you have value too. Even if it's been your choices that have done some harm, there's value there. Let me end with this last thing. As a pastor, I do a lot of weddings. This next year is going to be a pretty special year because in 2022, I get to do my daughter's wedding. She got engaged a couple months ago. Yeah, it's going to be fun. So Courtney and DJ, her fiance, they're getting married. And by the way, I didn't say a word about me doing their wedding. I was just quiet about it, right? I didn't say, hey, am I going to do your wedding? That would be silly. I said, I'm there to be the dad, but they invited me to do this, okay? So let me give you a little preview about what I do at weddings. At weddings, I may have been known to say one or two things to really get the attention of the bride and the groom because they're distracted by all the glitz and glamour of the event, right? Sometimes it's known as shock value. So at one point in the service, I ask, what rings do you bring of your symbols of love for one another? And they give them to me, and I hold them, and I say, do you know why we give rings? And the first is this, is because they're expensive. And the groom goes, yeah. And I tell them, it's because there's no greater value than this person, not this ring, but this person whose hands you are now holding. You know why we else give rings? It's because they're circles. There's no beginning and there's no end. So this love that you have for one another, just understand this, there's to be no end to your commitment to them. And then finally, I invite them to stand there and hold hands and stare into each other's eyes. And I say, just soak in this moment and take a look at one another deeply because this is the best they're ever gonna look. You think I'm kidding? Her beautiful hair that took 3 hours for somebody else to do, next week it's going in a ponytail. Things going in a messy bun under a hat. That dress that cost thousands of dollars, next week she's putting back on her college sweats. That makeup that took someone else hours to do, next week she's going au naturel. I'm letting you know, right? And that groom that is staring at you so attentively, next week he's going to be staring at a ball game with those same eyes. He spent 6 months working out so that he could get into that slim fit suit, right? Listen, pizza's coming back next week. That muffin top, it's coming back. Maybe it just went too far, I don't know. He's not shaving till Christmas. I mean, I do it as a reality thing. Truth be told, I've only done this at 2 weddings. It's really weird. Like the mother of the groom doesn't seem to find it funny. The mother of the bride sometimes hates me afterwards. But my point is this, listen, the wedding seems to be so unrealistic at times to get us ready for a great marriage. The truth is, from our wedding day on, we can lose a little shine. It can become a little lackluster. We can get some dings in our marriage along the way, and it can start looking a little bit tired. But I think this, if we're mindful of how to build a solid marriage, if we're mindful of the value and the condition that our spouse is in and how she or he feels about our relationship, if we're mindful of ourselves and our agenda, then I think we can all have a great marriage. And so that's what I'm inviting you to take a step into this week. And I hope you will. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thanks for the people you've put in our lives who love us. And thanks for the opportunity that we get to express our love and affection and commitment to our spouse, to our significant other. God, I would pray that you would give us great courage this week. Great courage to have great conversations, to be mindful of you, our spouse, and a plan. And as we do, I pray that you would strengthen the good marriages. I pray that you would save the ones that are on the rocks right now. And that somehow in the midst of this, God, we would find you. And if you agree with that, would you simply say, amen?